So what are the rules here? Because are we just spoiling everything? Are we having a conversation? Because in order to have this conversation correctly, I think we need to understand what the book is and how it ends, and therefore how it begins and all this. So like, are we pretending there are people out there who haven't yet seen this, are interested? Well, not pretending, there probably are people who haven't yet seen this and are going to listen to us discuss it. So tell me the rules we're playing by.
Yeah, I think it's impossible to do this without lots of spoiling. Yeah, right. I mean, what should we keep secret? Like the author's name? Like there's
right.
no.
I don't know. So we should say, for all of you out there, pause the podcast now. Go and spend 2.5 hours watching the movie and a day or two reading the book, and then we'll start in 5, 4. And now I'm doing the hand thing, but not saying the numbers and pointing to you.
And I'm going to recut all this so your timing is meaningless. I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS. Thank you, as always, for listening, and thank you especially to those of you who've had a chance to leave a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever else. Thank you for subscribing, or just for recommending the show to somebody you think might enjoy it, even if only so as to have something new to argue about. Just very quickly, I have to exercise a little bit of official SLEERICKETS nepotism today being Tuesday, for you yesterday, if you're listening to this the day it's released. Today is the day my wife Joanna Pearson's new book comes out. Her new book is called Now You Know It All. It's a collection of short stories that won the Drew Hines Prize, selected by Edward P. Jones. It's a great collection of stories. It's a great looking book. They did a really nice job with it, and it comes out today. So go buy this book. It's really good. She is the universally preferred member of our marriage. So if you like me, then you will like her far better. Please do go check it out. I will put a link in the show notes to some place you can buy it that is not Amazon. This week, I have my very first returning guest. Brian Platzer, the cosmopolitan Brooklyn sex novelist himself, is back, this time to talk about Iain Reid's novel I'm Thinking of Ending Things, as well as Charlie Kaufman's movie of the same name. Brian is a prolific writer, essayist, nonfiction commentator, humorist, as we will discuss later in the episode, and plenty of other things besides. He is the author of Bed-Stuy is Burning, The Body Politic, and most recently, Taking the Stress Out of Homework. You can find him on Twitter at @bplatzer. He tweets mostly boring things, I think, but that's probably prudent given the alternative. It's a fun conversation. It's a pretty long conversation, so I will get to it in just a moment. Just real quick, I want to make the note that in our conversation, I talk briefly about the poem Bone Dog by Eva H.D. The poem appears in the movie version of I'm Thinking of Ending Things, and for some reason, I, in our discussion of it, invented the name Hannah Davis and attributed the poem to her. My apologies to Hannah Davis, should she exist, and of course to Eva H.D., who is the real author of the poem Bone Dog. Sorry again, and let's just get straight to my conversation with Brian.
Sorry. To what extent did you do research?
Research.
Like, I still don't know what Oklahoma is about. the
Oh
musical?
yeah. Joanna was helpful. She was familiar with it, and so she pointed some things out. And then I looked up a Wikipedia page. So I knew a little bit of it, and then some of I just haven't seen Oklahoma. But I did a little bit of looking stuff up.
Did you read anything about what Charlie Kaufman said about his writing this movie and directing it?
No.
No. Okay. Neither did I. I think that's better. I think that's better.
Yeah, there were like some things that there were some clearly a whole lot of references and things, and I'm sure there are plenty that we both missed. But yeah. No. I mean, otherwise, I read it and took some notes, and I watched it and took some notes.
Yeah, I watched it twice. I read it once. My experience disambiguating the two is nearly impossible. I tried.
Yeah, let's talk first about the book a little bit, and then we'll probably end up just muddling it all the way through. So I'm thinking of Ending Things as a novel. It came out in 2016. It was by Iain Reid, who had previously written a couple of successful nonfiction books. This is
memoirs. Again, I haven't read these memoirs, but
they're memoirs. Okay, yeah, I just heard them listed as nonfiction.
I'm so curious about how this lunatic novel was written by a man who made his reputation writing memoirs, because this is the least memoir-y book I've ever read in my life. But
that makes so much more sense to me than I thought he'd written like biographies of Winston Churchill. And I was like, that makes because this seems so
okay. You're right.
Seat of pants.
The biography of Winston Churchill is farther from I'm thinking of Ending Things than memoirs about Iain Reid's own life.
So this was a successful book. It was NPR loved it. It sold a lot of copies. It was sold, and this is part of what like blows my mind about it. It was sold and bought as a literary thriller, which initially, at least, was how the movie was pitched to Netflix audiences. I mean, you can talk more about that later, but this is sort of presented as a literary thriller. It's short. It's like 200 pages. Do you want to give a sort of summary or sort of, I don't know. I mean, we can.
Yeah, I'll do my best. So the story is from the first person perspective of a woman, presumably in her late 20s or early 30s, who is in a car initially on the way to meeting for the first time the parents of the man she has been dating for approximately 6 weeks. The book occurs in thirds. The first third is her thoughts and their conversations on the way to the farmhouse where his parents live. The middle third is the depiction of that meeting where the four of them chat and have dinner. And then the final third is her trip home with the boyfriend after that meeting.
Yes, and home, but is highly complicated by the end.
As is everything. Yeah. And then in this book, it's also important to mention there are interstitial sections where unnamed observers are hysterically shouting to each other about a vicious, horrible crime that has been committed.
That they feel
it's so
immeasurably
like
horrible. Morally superior to, and like unimplicated by.
Right. So you have it's essentially a four-hander, right? You have the two, the girl, her boyfriend, the woman, her boyfriend, her parents, and then every 50 pages, there's a chapter break, and there are, I think, two unnamed, never met people who are just repeating how horrifying and aghast they are about the autopsy results and the manner in which this crime was committed, how much blood there was, how no one can believe such a thing could have occurred.
And the guy, like, there's the references to sort of having vaguely known the guy, or he was like a work person, a colleague. He sort of slowly pieced that together.
Can you believe such a man? The man had keys and he could commit such a crime, or the man went to a movie in the cinema and yet he could commit such a ghastly crime. So it's it's clever in its way, because you could write a book about anything and then interrupt it every 50 pages with two unnamed observers saying like, and can you believe everything that occurred in addition to the book that you're reading now? What an extraordinary series of events.
I mean, it's a little bit like you complained in an email about the device in the White Lotus series where it opens with the information that one of the characters that we are going to spend the entire series with dies, but we have no context other than that it's not the shithead fiance.
And it's just a funny move, and it's also lazy is not the right word, but it's sort of giving up from the beginning. It's like you can literally add to any novel ever an opening chapter where you hint at something grisly and horrible happening as a way to get the reader to engage more intensely. Or any television show can open with a divorce or a murder or a death or really anything, and then it adds momentum to a plot that, you know, we talk about whether it's earned or not. I don't think that's valuable because you earn it as soon as you put it into the manuscript. But like whether it's organically a part of a manuscript, I think is worth talking about. And it's in White Lotus on HBO, and in this book, I'm Thinking of Ending Things. It's just there's the work, there's the narrative fiction, and then on top of it, the author or the showrunner is saying, and there's a grisly, horrible death that will occur at some point.
Yes, yeah. There's a creates interest with this mystery, but then we have almost no indication for almost the whole length of the book about how that relates to anything else we're reading. And
I am willing to assert that the reason most novelists and showrunners do not use that device is not because they're unaware of it, and is not because they feel it is cheap, but because it sets up such expectations in the reader/viewer that the reader or viewer will almost by definition be disappointed when they get to the reveal of that the mystery has set up. And I felt that disappointment both in White Lotus and in I'm Thinking of Ending Things. That in White Lotus, I feel like that initial setup was entirely useless and shouldn't have been there. In I'm Thinking of Ending Things, I think the interruption every once in a while to tell you there's a horrible murder that will take place is necessary to the book. The book could not exist without it because it would be unreadably boring or insubstantial or something like that. But I think in both accounts, because you are reading for that conclusion has to be so extraordinary to meet the expectations of the reader or viewer that it is almost impossible to pull off, which is why, although one could begin any work of art with by the way, there's going to be a grisly, horrible murder at the end, you tend not to begin a work of art that way because those expectations become unmeetable.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And in both of us, unfortunately, were whatever, we saw the movie first and then saw the book then read the book it was based on. I found myself in getting to the end of this book thinking, if I sat down cold and read this and had it sold to me as a literary thriller, and then read these little interludes with the references to a grisly crime, and then read all of the mysterious stuff happening with the girlfriend character, and I got to the end, I would be fucking furious. I would think, what a shitty literary thriller this was.
I agree. I also don't know what literary thriller means. I don't want to spend too much time parsing it because I find the definitions of literary terms to be useless. Like you can call a poem whatever you want to call a poem, and I'll call something literary if I want to. It has something to do with interiority and character, but I don't feel like that will be a particularly valuable use of our time. Do you want to spoil it now for everybody before we move on? Like, should we say, ladies and gentlemen, here comes the giant reveal for both the book and the movie?
Yeah, well, and then we should just say that the other part of the thriller-ish, mysterious, the other thing that makes it a thriller or a mystery is that so the woman, we never get a name for her.
So that was Matthew saying no. He's saying he
Well,
doesn't want
there's like
to
yes, but
spoil
like
the whole thing for everyone
one more little piece of
before he talks a
information
little bit more.
just to clarify, because I want our audience to get to share to some extent.
Oh, we're gonna give him the thrill,
right?
Oh, well, you're gonna get the thrill. So you in the audience think this is a book as Brian. I'm Brian. This is a book as Brian just said. It's about a woman meeting the parents of her boyfriend.
Right.
That's all it's about, guys.
And the mysterious, judgmental interlocutors with the grizzly.
But that's all you think is going on here.
That's true. Yes, assuming you haven't seen or read. But so the other part of the other thing that makes the book mysterious and spooky and thrilling is that the girlfriend character seems throughout to have some difficulty remembering or clarifying, like, boy, we've been dating 6 weeks, but boy, it seems like a long time. Also, the very, very first sentence of the book, and the sentence that is repeated throughout the book, is I'm thinking of ending things, because she is already decided that probably she doesn't really want to keep dating this guy. Some things seem okay, but this isn't really, probably she shouldn't be going to visit his parents. They should, it's a little too much too soon. She's not really that into it. Probably. And the voice matters. So let me give the first. Yeah. You want to read the first few sentences? So the book begins. I'm thinking of ending things. Once this thought arrives, it stays. It sticks. It lingers. It dominates. There's not much I can do about it. Trust me. It doesn't go away. It's there whether I like it or not. It's there when I eat, when I go to bed. It's there when I sleep. It's there when I wake up. It's always there. Always. I haven't been thinking about it for long. The idea is new, but it feels old at the same time. When did it start? What if this thought wasn't conceived by me, but planted in my mind, pre-developed? Is an unspoken idea unoriginal? Maybe I've actually known all along. Maybe this is how it was always going to end. Yeah, and I will say that despite whatever misgivings I have about it, I think that the voice is probably the strongest part of the book. It is. I think he leans on it way too much, but the simultaneously, like the extremely flat and calm way in which this voice discusses like increasingly alarming ideas seems to be part of what, at least for me, creates some of the interest of the book. They're also like, what is happening with her boyfriend and what is happening with his parents becomes really hard to figure out, why they're doing any of the things they're doing, as well as this caller thing. There's a mysterious caller. So there are a variety of things in this book. Actions that the characters take, their psychological attitudes, other external factors that are never explained, the ending that are inexplicable and infuriating. You ready for my big reveal before we get to the book's big reveal? Yeah. My big reveal is I loved this book. I thought this book was great. We're going to talk about all the reasons you hated it, and I'm going to agree with all those reasons. Like, this is a loathsome, terrible book. I loved every second of it. I read it in 5 hours. It took me less time to read the book than watch the movie. You thought about a literary thriller. We're like mocking the idea. I thought this was a great literary thriller. The sentences were fascinating. It's like peak Hemingway, this shit. Like, I think this is, I enjoyed reading this book as much as I've enjoyed reading most books that I would put this in the top quarter of books I've enjoyed in the last year or two. I think Iain Reid wrote a hell of a book. I agree with the starred reviews by Publisher Weekly and Library Journal. I agree with NPR's Weekend Edition that it was a creepy, yes, enthralling new novel. I think this voice is fascinating. I think the fact that none of it makes any sense makes it even more exciting. It's this, we should get to the big reveal sometime soon, because it helps inform my big reveal, which is that I was, everything about me and my upbringing should make me despise this book, and yet I adored it. But I think this is great. Did you listen to all those sentences I read? They're so great. Oh, yeah, right. No, they are.
And then they're like, do you want to stop for coffee? And it's like, I think I don't. And, this is the last chance. I'm like, I want to know whether they're going to stop for coffee. And it's all done with such like linguistic precision, where it's clear that all these choices are made so actively. And the fact that all the choices add up to nothing and are meaningless if you spend any time thinking about it, it didn't negatively affect my reading of this book. I was furious at the end that nothing, manifested itself in an acceptable way, and that none of these decisions made any sense, that the characters aren't characters, that there's nothing, as one would say in workshop or in a literature class, earned. That being said, I immensely enjoyed the reading experience. And I think that Iain Reid pretty much was successful in manipulating me as he intended to manipulate all his readers. And for that, not only do I give him kudos, but I heartily recommend this book to anyone interested.
I can definitely say it is a very breezy and pleasant read. Like it is, you can whip through it, and it is perfectly enjoyable, sentence to sentence and page to page. Maybe like this is what people mean by a beach read. Like you want to read it and you don't want to think too much about it. So you want to do the opposite of what we're doing here, which is not read it but think too much about it.
Right, but the problem is Iain Reid desperately wants us to think too much about it. So it's not quite the definition of a beach read, because I think in a beach read, it's like, look at these people who won't end up falling in love, and they fell in love, and that, or like look at this, all these deaths that are happening in the town in Italy. Oh, this is the guy who made those deaths happen, and like, I think that this book wants to be thought of as the type of book that two assholes like us will spend time on a podcast dissecting. And I think it pretty much fails in all those ways. But that being said, what a wonderful way to spend 5 hours. In terms of entertainment, better than 10 episodes of Seinfeld. Like I totally enjoyed this.
Yeah, I think the book is almost the opposite of the movie.
Yes.
And like the book is like pure candy schlock that's totally unsatisfying and you never want to think about it again. And the movie is almost excruciating to watch, but I think like really beautiful and brilliant.
So I will fight you on both, but let's we're starting way too general.
So one last quick note before we spoil everything. There's a caller. She gets calls from this caller. She's been getting calls from this caller. She doesn't want to tell her boyfriend about him. He is an older man. He calls speaking in an effeminate, affected voice, like he's trying to pretend to be a woman talking. And he says the same thing on her answering machine, or when she picks up or when he leaves a message, he always says the same thing. The thing he says is, there's only one question to resolve. I'm scared. I feel a little crazy. I'm not lucid. The assumptions are right. I can feel my fear growing. Now is the time for the answer. Just one question to answer. He keeps calling. Two other weird things is that when she passes the phone to her boyfriend on one of these calls, the boyfriend listens to it and he says, "Oh, it's just some old woman." Like the boyfriend can't tell that it's a man. He thinks it's a woman as well. And then the other thing is that the call always comes from the girl's own number. Like her phone number is what shows up on her phone when this call calls. So this happens, and it keeps happening throughout the book, and she's really anxious about it, but she also doesn't want to discuss it with anybody except us. So the big reveal, do you want to spoil this book that you loved?
This is my favorite book, and the reveal behind the greatest work of 21st century literature is that the main characters don't exist. So it was all a dream. The whole thing. It didn't happen. What happens is there's an old guy whom parenthetically Iain Reid clearly despises and looks down on and gives no humanity to. And this entire book, the entire story, is his imagining what would have happened if a woman whom he happened to be seated next to at a bar during a quiz night had flirted with him in the way he wished she had. And then they had a brief relationship. And then he brought her to some simulacrum of his parents' house, a long time ago. So we are meant to believe that this old, sad man has pinned all of his current emotional and psychological energy on a meeting that never occurred with this one woman he didn't even really meet many, 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 many years ago. And that he has been writing about it in note form, but possibly novel length note form. And also, after he somehow satisfies himself with these characters, a younger version of his imagined self and an imagined girlfriend for that younger version of his imagined self, visiting some real-ish but imagined version of his family home, somehow this memory or this story or this narrative written or just thought is satisfying enough for him that he murders himself. He commits suicide, this old man, in the most gruesome, inexplicably painful way you have ever heard of somebody being committing suicide, namely that I think he takes some sort of coat hanger and twists it around and repeatedly shoves the points into his neck and chest until he dies. Now
he gives himself a coat hanger abortion.
Right. So we have no idea why this story matters so much to him that he must complete it before he kills himself in that manner. We have no idea why this, of all the women he saw and stood next to, is important enough to him to dedicate his final moments to. We have no idea why he kills himself in such a physically painful manner. We have no idea why the characters who have been hinting at this grisly death aren't named, or how they're chosen, or how they fit into any of this. But what we do know is the story that we've been reading up until this point towards the end is a fantasy fabrication of a man right before he's going to kill himself, which in the book at least gives a double meaning to I'm thinking of ending things, because it provides the female protagonist, the narrator, repetition of I'm thinking of ending things, meaning the relationship, but it allows the actual mind, the consciousness behind this story, to constantly remind himself that he's thinking about killing himself. And theoretically, the story of the girlfriend thinking of ending the relationship should propel the older gentleman who is going to commit suicide to kill himself, so they will think about ending things together. That never happens, that connection, but that is what should have happened, or probably is implied to have happened in the book.
Wait, I missed the part you said, ending things together? What?
Right, like if this were written well, what would happen is the girlfriend ends the relationship as the man who imagines all this ends his life. There should be a sort of asymptotic moment where one story contributes to the next, or else it makes no sense. So it makes no sense because that doesn't happen. But the dual meaning of I'm thinking of ending things is both the woman in the relationship and the man in his life. They should correspond at the end. There should be a coming together of those two narratives for this to have emotional punch. There is no coming together. It doesn't have any emotional punch, but all the opportunity is there for something along those lines.
And like in the last section of the book, which takes place in the high school where the old man is a janitor, the book like attempts sort of to heighten the literary thriller stakes by suggesting very strongly that the janitor is an evil murderer who's like chasing down the girlfriend who's hiding from him, and becomes like very like slasher flick until eventually she remembers that she doesn't exist.
Right. So slasher flick in a truly inexplicable way.
Yes.
Because there is no plausible explanation for why an elderly janitor about to kill himself would invent the story of the potential love of his life, who then finds herself coming to the elderly janitor who's imagining her and is terrified that he has the intention to murder her, unless this is him coming to terms in some way with his own suicide. But the grotesque fear of the unexpected coming that she feels doesn't have any correlation with any reasonable assessment of a man very slowly over the course of a long time deciding to end his own life. So those emotions are so at odds with each other that I can't make sense of them. You agree there or disagree?
I disagree with that, and I actually disagree with one other thing you said, which I think only like suggests how fundamentally we may like just differently. The other thing I disagreed with is that you said that he has that Iain Reid has total contempt for this old man. I actually, part of what annoyed me about the book is that I felt he was way too in love with the old man. I thought he was worshipful of the old man in this sort of weird self-aggrandizing way, or sort of like, to me it read like a sort of self-flattery. But no, the fear of I think the slasher flick quality of the end, where she's like trying to hide in the hallway and this creepy man's chasing her, that all seemed nonsensical. Her feeling, however, made sense to me insofar as in the moments leading up to suicide, it seems pretty common, if not universal, for people to feel a very strong, even violent ambivalence. And like part of them is very afraid and part of them is sort of determined. And so that to me felt like that's maybe where that comes from. The depiction of it as a murder chase thing seemed dumb, but right. The feeling made sense.
So what's fascinating about, I agree with that. It was the slasher movie aspect of it that made me a little crazy. What's fascinating about this book, in general, to me, is that Iain Reid uses all of these creepy tropes in a way that he doesn't attempt to explain. So not only does he have these people every once in a while come in and say, by the way, there's going to be a grisly, horrible death, but he has, this unnamed caller, which is, the most cliche horror movie trope, right? Where somebody's calling and they're calling from inside the building, or somebody's calling and we don't know who it is. Dead animals show up everywhere, and because life on a farm is hard. We keep on being told, but again, the dead animals don't amount to anything in the same way that the caller doesn't amount to anything. None of these are logical plot points that inevitably lead to something else. They are just token scary things. Similarly, there's a picture on a wall that changes based on who's looking at it, right? This is another just sort of a horror movie trope. We have the losing of hair and the pulling out of one's own hair, which is another sort of psychological thriller trope of people losing control. We have people often warning the main character, who shouldn't be in any danger, that she is in danger. That happens repeatedly. Again, nothing comes of it. We have no idea why she's being warned by all these characters. And we have she finds, her own shirt as balled up, in another character's house in a way. So like there are all of these just like objectively scary things.
In the basement, the weird
that pace the book,
basement,
and then don't go down to the basement. It's a big scary basement. And again, the basement is unnecessary to everything else that we're following. So I am fascinated by this book and really a fan of it, I think, because Iain Reid is just doing it all and doing it all correctly. He gives us all of these legitimately scary things. They are scary. On top of that, he maps what I find is a very controlled voice that doesn't make a single mistake until it actively tries to go into this other, thriller slasher film mindset. But it's all of this is written in short, compact, psychologically conscious and yet confused sentences that really works for me. And the fact that the whole thing doesn't add up was a minor disappointment at the end, but nothing more than that.
How many of Iain Reid's MFA classmates do you think killed themselves with coat hangers after this book was published?
I think more after it got the reviews that it got.
Right. Yeah.
I think Iain Reid successfully writing a thriller that doesn't really make any sense is something we could imagine, all of us could imagine our MFA classmates having done. Yeah. But this being described as concise, ingenious, and terrifying by everybody who reviewed it, I think that's when the coat hangers came out for all of Iain Reid's classmates.
Yeah, he just, I mean, he writes really, really good sentences. I think that's pretty inarguable. So another thing I did want to think about, and this is where I felt part of this is in contrast to the movie because I saw the movie first, but the thing about the old man character, the janitor character, who of course in the end we learn is Jake, is everybody in the book. He's a little bit of a polymath. He's a little pretentious. He refers to himself as a cruciverbalist when he first meets the woman. He's like part of a nerdy show-offy trivia group, but then he has, relatively, he has like in the book, I mean, I think in the movie they balance it in a different kind of way, but he's like sort of encyclopedic knowledge of several different fields. There are all these references to how like he was a very accomplished and successful and promising, potentially genius level physics grad student who had a kind of a nervous breakdown and had to, like, the reason that he's working as a janitor and is very sad and lonely and alone is that he a combination of like his mental instability and the cruelty and unfairness of the world and like failing to acknowledge his genius, I guess, like maybe just because the accumulation of special, exceptional happenstances feels to me a little bit unsatisfying in a novel. It got really annoyed me that on top of everything else, this guy was a sad, overlooked genius. Did you get that feeling, or was that my overreading? Because a lot of the same elements are there in the movie, but they're handled so differently that here it felt like he was bemoaning the world's failure to acknowledge this sad, brilliant man.
I agree, but that is why I am surprised that you think that Iain Reid sees himself in the sad, brilliant man. That is why I don't think Iain Reid sees himself in the sad, brilliant man. Because remember, Iain Reid has already had 2 successful memoirs by the time he wrote this. So where you see this as Iain Reid saying, look at me, I'm an unacknowledged sad, brilliant man, and all sad, brilliant men should be acknowledged. I read this as a form of almost cultural appropriation, where I think Iain Reid has no right to have pity for this unacknowledged, sad, brilliant man. And it comes out, for me, when he's describing the sad, brilliant man towards the end when he's deciding to kill himself, the sad, brilliant man is, I hold my hand over my mouth to muffle my own sound. My hand is shaking. I don't want to feel anything. I don't want to see him. I don't want to hear anything anymore. I don't want to see. It's not nice, period. That's it. It's not nice was such a demeaning thought to put in the head of a sad, brilliant man. He makes him a simpleton at the end. And that to me is where I saw the movie do a far better job than the book, because I think the actor who plays the brilliant man sort of gives that character some depth and pathos in the way that Iain Reid does not. Iain Reid's sad, brilliant man just shows up at the end to kill himself. And I feel like he's doing, sad suicide guy shtick here, which I felt distanced me from the book and from that character in a way that made you feel like we were supposed to celebrate that guy. I didn't get that feeling at all in the book.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you about it's not nice. That I think that is a really condescending thing to have the character say. There's part of what got to me, a lot of what suggested to me Iain Reid's actual feelings about this old man were not so much what he says and does, but what the shitty nameless interlocutors in the little interstitial sections say, which is like, here I found it. So on page 89, it was the most annoying one to me. Or second most annoying, when they're talking about this horrible thing, which of course, as we learn, is the guy's stabbing himself to death in a closet in the high school where he works. They say, we can't let the actions of one man make us feel guilty. This isn't about us. We're the normal ones. It's only about him. You're right. It's good to be reminded of that. I mean, that is so ridiculous. Like, it's not even that's callous and self-centered. Like, that's not even how callous, self-centered people speak when someone they know is dying. They over empathize. They pretend to be in that person's shoes. So it's totally, to me, it's totally like, it is so dismissive of people who fail adequately to show understanding for this guy. And then it is, I mean, to me, like the really the cherry on top, like the little note that like most maddened me in this book was the very, very, very end, when, as you said, we learned that the majority of the book, with the exception of those little italicized sections, has been this man's lengthy, inexplicable, and exquisitely well-written suicide note. And the two interlocutors say, he wrote about this, he wrote about these characters. Does he explain why he ended things? I'm not sure. We're not really sure. Maybe. What do you mean? He either explained it or he didn't. It's just what? It's not that simple. I don't know. Here, look at this. What is all this? This is a lot of pages. Is this what he wrote? Yes, you should read it, but maybe start at the end, then circle back. First, though, I think you better sit down. And to me, that's like, again, like that is literally the thought that somebody has in fantasizing about committing suicide and having everybody mourn his loss and how little they appreciated him while he was alive. I mean, that it's a crazy, crazy thing to write, to end the book on. And to me, that's why I'm with you in thinking like, this is definitely not Iain Reid writing about himself. But what I thought it was, you said it was cultural appropriation. I think what he was doing was saying, I wonder what life would have been like for someone like me if all of his brilliance hadn't been recognized. Let me put myself in those shoes. That's what it felt like to me.
Yeah, that's not bad, because then what it would be was he would have written a best-selling,
the same brilliant book that he wrote,
manuscript, except he would just be a sad janitor, right? Like,
yeah. And only after his death would everybody recognize. Like, would the same result occur?
Right. And he's I mean, that shift to the implicit second person, where he's like, and now, readers, you should reread the book knowing what you know now. Ha ha ha. Like, it is like, joke's on you. When we as the reader were like, no, we got it, man. Like, we don't need to reread the book. We got pretty much what was, like, it's the same thing. This is what we expected, which I think is a useful time to transition to the movie a little bit, because I see the book as a gripping manuscript that fails to end, that doesn't know how it's supposed to end, that all the pieces don't add up. Like a less infuriating version of Lost, the TV show. Did you watch Lost?
No.
So Lost is this extraordinarily well done J.J. Abrams television show.
In fact, like hugely popular.
Hugely popular. One of the last critically acclaimed, hugely popular network hour-long television shows, before everything was NCIS and CSI. Lost, the basic premise is that a plane crashes on an island, bunch of people die, bunch of people survive, and then this island has some magical properties or some unique scientific aspects, or exists outside of time or something. And then episode by episode, not only do you get the background of the characters, but you also get how this island has its own life. And you have a smoke monster that relates and reacts in complicated ways. And you have another group of people who have been inhabiting the island who are very vicious and cruel. And then you have scientific experiments. Then you realize you can go back in time. And there are all these absolutely like fascinating episode by episode mysteries that are created. And as a viewer, week by week, year by year, you become obsessed with, this is extraordinary. How is it all going to come together? Like, how does it make sense that this smoke monster both has an agency in and of itself, and there's this other sort of demon god living on the island, and how does it all come together, and what's going to happen? And the answer is, no one ever thought about that. No one ever figured it out. There was no, the showrunners just never thought ahead. And it was like the biggest, like, fuck you, punch to the gut of an audience member or a reader any of us have ever experienced. And this isn't a me thing. This is just like, if you Google the YouTube thing of like the 50 most unexplained things about Lost that make you hate it in retrospect, and they're like, each viewer has his own 50. Like, there are an infinite number of things that just make you crazy to think about. I feel like Iain Reid has some of that here. It's not as awful because, as opposed to taking years of people's lives and a million recaps in New York Magazine, Iain
It's
Reid,
like the artistic equivalent of a Ponzi scheme, where like you
right,
think
exactly.
it's brilliant until the very last minute.
Exactly, and you're like, oh, no one even thought. It's not like the answer was bad. It's that they were writing all these cool mysteries, and the reason they were able to do this all the whole time is because none of it made sense. Like no one bothered. There was this guy in Lost, and then I'll stop. But over and over again, the thing that made me and there are a million things, but my thing is like almost every episode, this obese man who won the lottery comes back to these numbers that were the numbers that won the lottery for him. And they appear in the lottery ticket, and they appear in the clouds, and they appear on a nuclear submarine that's found on the island. And no one knows why at the end, and it's never mentioned, and the show just ends. Like there's no one even says like, hey man, like remember those numbers you're always talking about that seems to be the solution to all the problems? Like what was that about? No one, they stop being mentioned in the last 6 episodes, and it's not that egregious. But whereas this book is gripping in the same way Lost was gripping, but fails to end in any sensible way, in the same way Lost fails to end, I feel like the movie version, rewritten and adapted by Charlie Kaufman and directed by Charlie Kaufman, is all about the ending. I feel like the movie is obsessed with its ending, where yes. I feel like Charlie Kaufman read this book, had a similar reaction to ours, or to mine, which is, this is fascinating, this is exciting, this deals with some really complicated issues, but it was a massive failure. So I am going to redirect this and make it all about the end. And I am going to give you, the watcher of this movie, an end that is satisfying, that is unexpected, that is beautiful in a way that art can be beautiful, and that Iain Reid can attempt. So would you like, Matthew, to talk a little bit about the ending of the movie as a way to get into the fundamental of what differs the movie from the book?
Sure, yeah. I do agree that I think he takes what is totally unresolved and poorly thought through in the book, and he thinks it through and works it through really beautifully. And he adds another, I think, pretty significant element to it. It's not really a new puzzle piece, but it's a new element to the storytelling. And he subtracts all of the elements that make the book a literary thriller. Like, so there are no interstitial conversations about a grisly murder. There are little interstitial moments and shots, but they're not murder mystery-ish. They're mostly of the old man, like cleaning dishes in a house and sort of doing mundane tasks and then going to work and walking through the high school. And then there is a caller, and there's some similar feeling of confusion, but it is within the first 5 to 10 minutes made clear that there's something profoundly unreal about what we're watching. So there's far less of a sense that there's an actual live threat, and more of a mounting, an increasingly clear collage of expressionist, storytelling. So I think that
the fact that it is a Charlie Kaufman movie,
right,
makes the viewer show up with a different set of expectations than being told that you're reading a literary thriller. I mean, if whether you've watched Eternal Sunshine or Being John Malkovich or sort of these other books that play with the liminality of time and place, and how what is might not be what it appears, I think that from the beginning that what you're watching is a Charlie Kaufman movie, and therefore there's an irreality to almost all of it, in the way that Iain Reid has the benefit of sort of pulling the rug out from under you. Charlie Kaufman doesn't attempt to do that. Charlie Kaufman, from the beginning, indicates, her name changes in the first 10 minutes from one name to another. Like
he's able to hear her thoughts.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it's very clear early on that this is, and those are the two of his movies that felt close. Well, those, and then Synecdoche, New York. Synecdoche, New York was closest in being like it's my favorite of his movies, but it's like the most punishing. So I'll say there's actually one other thing that I think Iain Reid did pretty well or interestingly in the book that is one of the things that Kaufman most picks up on, which is that there is an awareness and skepticism throughout the book of the male author / imaginer's ability to create this mind of this woman. So like down, like including the caller being a man affecting a woman's voice. And there are these lines like, thought is more authentic than action or than life. And Jake makes this claim about, I think a lot of what we learn about others isn't what they tell us, it's what we observe. So it's, you see more clearly who someone is from the outside sometimes than the inside.
Do you mind parsing this for me? Because this is what I struggled with most in the book and the movie. A man is imagining / inventing a woman. That woman is telling her story. And yet the woman who is imaginary doesn't have a good firm sense of what's going on in the invented reality. She doesn't remember her own name at times. She doesn't remember how long she's been with the boyfriend. She doesn't remember whether she's had too much to drink or had nothing to drink at all. This is both in the book and the movie.
Yeah.
Can you explain to me what that means or what's going on? Why does an imagined fictional character within a fiction not have a good grasp of her reality, or not? Why is that imaginary person unable to remember things? Right.
There are a couple different pieces of writing and movie that the book reminded me of, even apart from the movie itself. One was That Obscure Object of Desire. Do you know the Luis Buñuel movie?
I do not.
Okay, so it's a really entertaining, weird movie, but it's a guy who's falls in love with this woman, and he's obsessed with her, and he kind of pursues her, and she's elusive, but she's very beautiful, and they have sex, but then she also has sex with other people, and he's kind of forever chasing after her, and they have this kind of violent relationship, and he's awful to her, she's awful to him, but he can't stop desiring her, and she kind of destroys his life, but also gives purpose to his life. And it would be an intense psychodrama romance anyway, but then Buñuel does this thing where the character who has one name and one part in the movie is alternately played by two different beautiful women.
Okay.
So they're just two actresses who, without explanation, step in and out of the role, and the man just treats them as if they're the same. And to me, it feels like part of what that enacts is the man's tendency to see in all women really kind of the same single figure, which is his own desire more than anything else. Hence the title. And that so the other thing that the other book that this most reminded me of, or didn't remind me of, because I think this is a really wonderful novel, but put me in mind of, was The Brief History of the Dead by Kevin Brockmeier. Do you know that one?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So the premise of that one, very simply, is that there is a city where when people die, they go to this city after dying, and then they stay in that city. You figure out eventually they stay there as long as there is a person on Earth who remembers them. And this is another version of a kind of an enactment of the neurological phenomenon that David Eagleman also writes about in his little weird book of stories, Some, whereby like we in our brains build little simulations of the minds of people we know. And so we are sort of running little simulations of all the people. And, and this is where you'd say someone lives on in your memory. And, the better you know someone, the more accurately you can kind of like simulate what that person might think. And so this felt to me like it had the flickering quality of a fantasy or of an imagination or of a dream in which there is a kind of a toggling between different possible versions. I'd say in the movie, it's much clearer that the woman is a composite than it is in the book. In the book, it seems much more like she's basically one person, with the small exception of there's a moment where, and it's in the movie, it's the only moment where there's anything remotely like sexual tension, where the Jake and the girlfriend start to make out in the car, and then the creepy old man is watching them. And so to me, that felt clearly like a projection of like sometime the old man had been watching some young couple make out in a car. So that felt like, there's a little bit of a piecing together of those roles there. In the movie, it's much clearer that there are actually many different imagined and possibly real snips and snatches of women that are being pieced together into this one. So to me, it was like taking that clearly like totally male-centric perspective and then telling the story by plugging the POV into the constantly shifting role of the woman.
I think that's very well said. I think that I have a better sense of it now. Thank you. My only follow-up question is that the old man realizing that he has not filled out her character enough, or is that actually us entering into the mind of this fictional character within a fictional character and seeing the desperation or the uncertainty of somebody who is stuck as a fictional character in the mind and therefore doesn't have access to her own memories?
And you missed another layer, which is, or is that Iain Reid / Charlie Kaufman preemptively apologizing for being a man making up and telling the story of a woman as if he can imagine what's inside her mind? And I mean, I think part of what I actually kind of liked about the book and the movie is that I think it's all three.
Right. Yeah. And then that's part of what I liked as well. I think the scariest part of both the book and the movie is when you are in her mind and she is not in control of her mind, and you don't know whether that's because she is not in control because the person who is imagining her is not in control, or if it's the author who's not in control. And I think that tripartite tension is literally thrilling.
A friend's dad, when I was a kid, I remember being in the car with them, and the friends, they mentioned Garrison Keillor on the radio, and the friend said, "Dad, what's a humorist?" And he said, "Oh, it's like a comedian, son, but just not as funny." And to me, like, that's what literary thriller is. Like, it's like a thriller, but so
that's I think all the shouts and murmur stuff. Like I've written the New Yorker or the McSweeney's. I've written whatever, a dozen of these things, and I try to explain them to people, and it's like imagine if instead of like a joke that makes you laugh a lot, there's a joke where you go like, "Oh, I see what you're doing there." Yeah, like that is what I've accomplished in publishing in the New Yorker and McSweeney's. It's right. How astute.
Which is what the literary genre does as well.
Yes.
It flatters the reader. So something I think was probably just an inescapable difference between the book and the movie is that temporal and physical and like identity-based ambiguities in the book, where like the character might say something like, "It seems like Jake can hear my thoughts," or like, "It seems like the dad seems a little older than he was a minute ago," or "It seems like I can't remember this." Those kinds of things, because it's a book, are simply impressions, and they may be like increasingly ominous impressions, but in a movie, they're unmistakable physical differences. And that's why, like, I think in some ways, like, maybe though they both Iain Reid and Charlie Kaufman leaned into the nature of their medium, because Iain Reid played that ambiguity to the hilt, and Charlie Kaufman let us know right away that this is a literally unstable story that we're being told.
So do you mind talking a little bit about the movie? Because the movie differs from the book in some fundamental ways. We've alluded to it, but not explicitly gone through it. So do you mind talking about both the allusion aspect of the movie, where it's full of references to other works of art, and then do you mind discussing the ending?
By the way, I should say Jake is played by Jesse Plemons. The girlfriend, whose name is sometimes Lucy, sometimes Lucia, she's played by Jessie Buckley. The dad is played by David Thewlis, and the mom is played by Toni Collette. They're all terrific.
Masterfully, by the way. Like,
and I think like Jessie Buckley is like, the movie couldn't work if she were not.
I was going to say, especially Jessie Buckley, whom I hadn't seen before, who is an extraordinary actor.
Yeah, I mean, she makes it work in a way that it really could not otherwise.
Yeah.
So the movie throughout I guess like probably the earliest instance is in that initial car ride. Throughout the movie, there are quotations, lengthy quotations from other texts, from the musical Oklahoma, from the movie reviews of Pauline Kael, from there's a very close reenactment of the Nobel Prize speech from A Beautiful Mind. There is early on, there's an exchange between, since this is a nominally poetry podcast, which by the way, like I'm so bad at controlling what this podcast is about that I just feel like bleeding listeners, whatever. What the fuck is he doing this time? So there is actually a decent amount of poetry in the movie. So early on, he's able to hear her thoughts. Her thoughts are all, when am I going to break up with this guy? And he jumps in by saying, by talking about Wordsworth, and specifically Wordsworth's ode, Intimations of Immortality from Recollections of Early Childhood. The girlfriend responds like most normal people, saying like, that's the whole that's a title, and like, I'm not a metaphorical type gal, and I don't, she seems not even to have heard of Wordsworth.
Yep.
So he does say like, oh, don't you even want to hear how it begins? Just because this is a poetry podcast, this is such a double layered Charlie Kaufman reference that I have to say that, of course, the first line of Intimations of Immortality is, the child is father of the man. Of course, like throughout the movie, we're seeing like young Jake juxtaposed against old Jake. And on top of that, the child is father of the man. And the next two lines are themselves Wordsworth borrowing from an earlier poem. He wrote a shorter poem called My Heart Leaps Up. And then the next day he started writing ode, and he stole the first three lines, or he stole three of the lines and put them at the first line. So it's not only like referring to like the theme of the movie, it's also repeating the allusive quality of the movie. So then like minutes later, he refers to the girlfriend as a poet, and she seems suddenly to be a poet, and who presumably would at least have heard Wordsworth's name and not say something like, I'm not a metaphorical type gal. And he says, are you working on anything? And she recites from memory a pretty polished and like moving and strange poem about, the first line is, it's terrible, coming home is terrible. And Jake is extremely moved by this. This is a real poem by, I think, Hannah Davis, called Bone Dog.
Yes.
This, along with many, many other references from throughout the movie, we get there's a brief moment when she gets to the farmhouse, but then she goes up to Jake's childhood bedroom, which there's a very brief shot where you see a bookshelf, and on the bookshelf are like half of the references made in the movie, including like there's a collection of Wordsworth, there's a collection of Pauline Kael essays, there's a book called Introduction to Virology, there's a DVD of Beautiful Mind, there's a poster of Betty Davis. There's a conversation about Betty Davis earlier, and in the book of there's a book of poetry that's open to the poem Bone Dog. Sorry, what?
David Foster Wallace.
Oh, David Foster Wallace. Yeah, that's supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again. And then you can only see it. I only saw it because I happened to pause it here. But did you notice the hand labeled DVDs?
No, I did notice the urn of the dogs.
The urn of the dog, yeah, who we saw just moments earlier.
Yeah, what was the
so he has below the Beautiful Mind, he has like those little punch machines that make label makers.
Yeah, sure.
So he has a bunch of DVDs, and the spines have these label maker labels on them, and their labels are abandoned friendships, lasting memories of sorrow, futile efforts at success, and unforgettable mishaps.
What a jackass. Like, that's where
it's so ridiculous, but I just
it's funny. I mean,
it is.
There are funny moments in both the book and the movie. I think Charlie Kaufman can be very funny. I wish he were funnier more in this movie. But have you seen The Usual Suspects?
I have.
So for those of you, I'm about to spoil The Usual Suspects, and if you haven't seen The Usual Suspects now, like, I don't know, go fuck yourself. But like,
you also like, this is a movie where like if you spoil it like 90% of the joy will be drained
Right,
from the movie
that's what I was
instantly.
gonna say. So, like, if you haven't seen The Usual Suspects, like, go fuck yourself. But also, if you haven't seen The Usual Suspects, really, like, stop listening to this podcast now and go watch The Usual Suspects, because it provides one of the a unique joy in the history of cinema, which I will spoil now, which is that you get to the very end of the movie in The Usual Suspects, and Kaiser Soze, played by the always lovable Kevin Spacey, has been narrating the movie. And then we pan out, and the detective who has been interrogating Kevin Spacey drops his mug dramatically on the ground after Kevin Spacey leaves, because it turns out that all the elements of the story Kevin Spacey has been telling exist in various names and forms on a poster on his wall, and on the coffee cup, and on the sign of the name of whoever made the cabinet, etc. So the entire story we just read is all made up. And, like, don't think about that too much, because, like, why would Kevin Spacey just use everything from the officer's office? Like, that doesn't really make any sense. But it is a stunning, wonderful moment where everything you've just seen becomes meaningless. Everything we thought was real was actually invented by a character.
But unlike I'm thinking of many things, it's motivated in that, like, it's not just that it was all a lie or a dream. The guy telling the story is actually the central villain of the story he's telling. And so he's telling this elaborate story in order to do what he does then moments later, which is walk down the street and get into a car and disappear.
Exactly. Whereas this scene, and I'm thinking of ending things, has that Usual Suspects feeling, because it is providing all of the raw material that we have been viewing up until this point, that we'll continue to view. But it is not surprising at all. It is as though we are handed a manual in the middle of the movie, saying all these references that you know come from somewhere, or uncertain what they're about. Let me show you the bedroom that contains them all. So as opposed to providing a thrilling reversal, it, like, very gently and generously provides a key to the map that we've been trying to navigate this whole time.
Yeah, right. Which I think would be, if it were really a mystery up till now, would have a little bit of that thrill, but would, I think, actually also be sort of annoying and unsatisfying. There is a very, very minor motif in the book that Charlie Coffin picks up on and makes almost the major theme of the movie, which is, and I think in that very first page you read, the narrator says, is an unspoken idea unoriginal? And then later she makes notes about, she says, I don't have it exactly before me, which is like, it's always interesting to meet somebody's parents, because it reminds you that we're all composites, and that we're kind of made up of other. And so one of the major themes of the movie is that rather than being an unappreciated genius, I also thought do you know Henry Darger, the outsider artist? He was, I mean, to me, it felt like he had to be part of the motivation or the inspiration, because he was a old man janitor, very poor. As a boy, he went to one of these horrible, like, nickel boys type penal institutions for, like, young boys who are in trouble. He horribly abused. He lived an extremely reclusive life. And then when he died, they found, like, a 6,000 page illustrated epic novel about the Vivian girls.
I remember now.
And it is actually
legitimately
beautiful.
A masterpiece, right?
Right. I mean, it is, like, genuinely, I mean, a lot is sort of traced and printed, and it's all these different mixed media, but it is genuinely beautiful and strange. And there even, like, there's some notes, like there's a reference in I'm thinking of any things to, like, the Jake making paintings in the basement, and they're sort of like, they're androgynous, and, like, they have little weird penises and things. So the Vivian girls famously, like, have little penises, and the suspicion is that Henry Darger had probably never seen a woman naked, and just sort of assumed that, like, they're like boys, like that,
right.
Yeah. So that came to mind. But in the movie, unlike in the book, Jake is not a genius. He didn't, like, actually go to grad school for physics. We're told he at school he won the diligence pen, which is really
it's a funny joke.
It's very fun, and they even have a later moment where if you look,
he's wearing the pin.
He's wearing the diligence pen.
His mom. He's yelling, "I didn't want the diligence pin!"
Right? Yeah. He's like, it's a also ran, and then his mom later, like more brutally says, trying to praise him. She says maybe he wasn't as naturally talented as some of the others, but he worked so hard. And there's to do as well as Jake did with no special talents or abilities. That's more impressive. So, I mean, it is funny, but there also is this sense that like he's a little bit of a dilettante who was like just smart enough to sort of know his own limitations and be really frustrated by them. So that there is it's not just that, like, because that's the thing in I'm thinking of ending things is like, in order for this guy to be a totally unappreciated genius, like there does need to be some indication of like, well, where is his actual original thought? And of course, the answer to that is this brilliant book that you've been reading is his original thought. Whereas in the movie, he has no original thoughts. That there's even a line. I mean, there's basically like a line where the Jessie Buckley girlfriend character says this. Here's the little paragraph that to me was like probably the slightly too explicit like thesis statement of the movie, which is, "It's tragic how few people possess their souls before they die. Nothing is more rare in any man," says Emerson, "as an act of its own. And it's quite true. Most people are other people. Their thoughts are someone else's opinions. Their lives a mimicry, their passions a quotation." That's an Oscar Wilde quote. And to me, like, that's part of what I found so moving about the movie, is that it was a genuinely like tragic sort of swan song made up of totally unoriginal thoughts. Like, it's a swan song for not a sad genius artist who died in obscurity, but for somebody whose death is just as sad, but who had no genius original thoughts at all. But like everything is sort of a composite of things he's watched or read or heard of.
But were you not bothered, as I was, by how sophisticated that composite was? I mean, where you spent a lot of time blaming Iain Reid for his, self-indulgence, and more than self-indulgence, his putting himself up on some sort of literary pedestal implicitly. I felt that same way towards Charlie Kaufman, where I'm like, I get it, man. Like, you not only are familiar with the history of cinema, but you're familiar with the history of cinematic criticism. You're reading these sophisticated poets and sophisticated nonfiction essays. You're a master of all of these various, cinematic and stage arts, philosophy and painting, and like, did it not seem to you, as it did to me, that like, I know Charlie Kaufman knows all this stuff. Why is he trying to show me how much he knows?
Right. So I had a couple thoughts about this. So, because you're right. Like, at a certain point, like, if Jake has this not deep knowledge of all these fields, like, isn't he then kind of unacknowledged? But I think,
and like, where's all the lowbrow stuff?
So I think the part that felt to me least likely for somebody to have a working familiarity with was the part that was that is drawn directly from the book, which is the early on. There's a little exchange in the car about virology, and this sort of, there's like, both the girlfriend and Jake use extremely precise, extremely opaque jargon that seems to be the sort of thing you could only say if you were a virologist. That is from the book. And then he puts in intro to virology in the stack of books. That to me felt like the least likely instance. But elsewhere, I thought he actually makes a point throughout the movie of saying, this is not really deep knowledge. This is middlebrow. Like, this is, he's read Pauline Kael reviews. He knows about Betty Davis, and then there even, like, there are a couple of moments where there's one moment they keep referring to the girlfriend as having different professions, and she seems like mildly confused, but then immediately goes along with whatever the new suggestion is. There's a moment where they both, like, supposedly the story is that both she and Jake are physicists, and she gives the example of the Curies, and the dad, who's a boor and a Philistine, says like, everyone knows about the Curies. I've heard of the Curies. And then there's, later on in the car, Jake asks about if she's read a supposedly fun thing they'll never do again by David Foster Wallace. And the first thing she says is like, oh, didn't he kill himself? And he says, yeah, well, he killed him. Even people who haven't read a word of his literature know that. Everybody knows that. So there is a feeling that, like, and like the speech is from A Beautiful Mind, so like it feels very much like
right.
It's aspirational. It's the sort of stuff that you reach for and read and want to know and want to demonstrate your knowledge of if you want to be really smart and sophisticated, but it doesn't seem like it's actually that demanding or sophisticated in itself.
God, that's giving Charlie Kaufman so much credit. I think that you're right. I wonder whether you think that he was purposefully painting a portrait of a oddball who thinks he's smart and therefore has a superficial knowledge of the type of things that this oddball is interested in? You think Charlie Kaufman distanced himself enough from the film in order to not think that he's choosing the right references, but choosing the references that this guy would have thought of?
I think so. To give like contrasting examples, there's extensive quotation from Oklahoma, and there's extensive quotation from A Beautiful Mind. Now, A Beautiful Mind, in the A Beautiful Mind scene, where like in the Beautiful Mind movie, which of course is also a movie about a guy who's delusional and sees people who aren't there, sees people who aren't there. He's a Nobel Prize winning mathematician, and at the end, he gives this extremely sappy speech about really it's all about love. And in the audience, you see these characters who've been played by attractive young people throughout the movie, played in like horrible stagey makeup. That I remember watching A Beautiful Mind and seeing like his made up old wife and being like, ugh, what is that? Not like that doesn't look remotely like a real person. But then in this movie, they're wearing like literal high school stage makeup. Like it's deliberate. So to me, like he's quoting that scene with contempt, whereas the citations from Oklahoma, including like an extensive dream ballet segment to give a nod to Agnes DeMille, I think that he's making fun of A Beautiful Mind as being supposedly smart people fare. And then he is making a point of elevating Oklahoma and saying, aha, this is not just pop culture. I actually think there's something really fine and beautiful to this. And then the last note of the movie is a song sung by a sad Jake-like character from Oklahoma, which is a very hopeful song in which which ends, of course, with Jake's death. So the other thing we should say, Jake does not butcher himself in the movie. He sort of passively kills himself by sitting in his car and waiting ambiguously, and he sort of loses his mind, and he basically just sits in his truck, and on the very last shot of the movie, you see his truck in the parking lot with the ignition off, just covered in a foot of snow.
Right.
So
he just freezes to death.
Yeah, presumably.
And his death pangs are animated for us through what you've alluded to as a rather moving, lovely balletic dance routine. And Jesse Plemons singing a song from Oklahoma, all grease painted up in terrible makeup in front of everybody
Lonely
else.
Room is what
which is I think both absurd and moving in a very impressive way. But
I'll say but just the used Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, the line from Eloisa to Abelard, he was proud enough of pulling that juicy line from Pope's under-celebrated poem that he made it the title of his movie. So I think he's proud when he pulls a deep cut, and he pulled so many non-deep cuts in this movie that I think that was deliberate. Not that it really matters how deliberate it was, but
that's totally fair. I also think Charlie Kaufman is just likes making fun of contemporary movies. Like there's an absurd scene which is in many ways the opposite of the movie I'm thinking of ending things, where a man declares his love for a woman, and the woman gets fired from her job as a diner. It's like cheese ball nonsense. And then there's a name where it's directed by Robert Zemeckis, which that's like a weird insult to Robert Zemeckis. Similarly, I mean, also he just makes fun of A Beautiful Mind and like Russell Crowe and the director of A Beautiful Mind in a way that it's, for me, was a counterpoint to what you're talking about, where it's not him differentiating between high art and low art. It's him making fun of his contemporaries in filmmaking, just like he makes fun of. I mean,
in a way, like the Robert Zemeckis movie that's more dignified than the Ron Howard movie, because it's sort of like it knows what it is. And there is, I actually think he used, so there is a little weird moment where you see the janitor eating his lunch in the middle of the night while he's watching this movie in the cafeteria. And it's this schlocky, dumb romantic comedy movie. And there's a scene where the cute boy and the cute girl are working as waiters in a restaurant, and the cute boy declares his love for the girl, and the girl gets fired, but they sit outside and they're happy and they love each other. In the middle of this very dumb, bad scene, there is a totally forgettable old man who's the girl is waiting on. And he does, I think, nicely later reframe his relationship with the girl as being with the girlfriend character as being like, oh, we met in a cafe where she was my waitress. So you see him like turn that scene so that the sad old forgettable man is the secret hero of the scene, which I thought like that was a nice little microcosm for what Jake does throughout the movie. Yeah, I mean, Charlie Kaufman is a snob, and he's definitely incredibly pretentious, and he's very happy to promote his own erudition. But I think it works pretty well in this movie.
Right. No, that's totally fair. And I give both the book and the movie a thumbs up. Do you
though the movie is, I mean, I found it easier to watch the second time, because the first time I just found it so excruciating to like know that what you're watching is this weird mess and collage, and know that like the girl character can't possibly be real despite being the central figure, but then having to like slowly work things out. I found it less pleasant to watch than any of his other movies, though I still admire it greatly. It has no thrilling aspects to it. It is a 2 hour and 14 minute exquisite lyric collage
with exquisite performances.
Oh, I mean, again, terrific performances that the movie really, you couldn't, this is not a movie that is actor proof.
I think that's what I got. Is there anything that we haven't?
Oh yeah. So one, since the other podcast we are accidentally starting is the Is He Secretly Gay podcast, because I wanted to ask that question about the Jake in the movie, because one of the other things that seemed like there are a few moments where Jake seems like oddly sensitive in a way that felt like, where is that coming from? So early on, the girlfriend quotes Betty Davis saying, "Getting old ain't for sissies," talking about the parents and how they're suffering as they get older. And he says, "True, but one might object to her use of the term sissies as a pejorative," which is like, well, yeah, that's right. I mean, that is, I guess that is sort of in an old-fashioned, obscure way, homophobic. And then later on, she, in what feels very much like, I couldn't find the source, but it feels very much like a women's studies paper she's reciting from memory later on in the movie, where she says psychiatrists for a long time, because of Freud, blamed mothers for everything, and she rattles off a list of pathologies, and in that list is homosexuality. And Jake objects again to that, like, well, homosexuality isn't a pathology. The dad refers a couple times he refers to Billy Crystal as a Nancy, and then it's off stage, it's not clear, but it seems like he's referring to Jake as a Nancy. There's the scene where they make out in the car very delicately, and he almost seems like a child doing it, and that feels like a memory, literally like a memory that the janitor has of watching two kids make out in a car. Other than that, I mean, he may not ever touch her in the movie. There's no chemistry. There's a sense that like both the mom and the dad feel like, because we realize that the mom and the dad are also his sort of memory / feelings about the mom and the dad, and they both are like weirdly crude about having sex, both like with themselves, and the dad referring to like
the father,
the girlfriend saying, well, we're not old-fashioned about you and Jake fucking. Are you going to do much fucking in this bed? And it feels like very coarse in a way that I read as being like Jake wincing at something his dad said in a way that felt like maybe more than what was intended by his dad. So it felt like there was this very understated theme in the movie and he like, there's all this stuff about being, oh, you're into musical theater, really? And we learn like, oh, he's really into musical theater. He knows them all very well. And there's a weird little jingle. He recites the jingle to Charlie Kaufman, because he can't resist. He creates a whole stand-in for the Dairy Queen they stop in, which is this imaginary place called Tulsi Town. And there's like a whole horrible, like nightmarish, like sexy ice cream queen clown, and who's like
stomping on villains in the
commercial. Like part of the song is like, you can keep eating more junk, you keep getting fatter, and there's this weird creepy moment where he gives this like really like kind of unnerving, extremely precise falsetto sort of mincing rendition of the clown queen song that again, like
effeminate, and
it's effeminate and so, like, right, like maybe almost offensive depending, right. Like, but it just felt to me like there was a sort of quiet under like theme throughout the movie, like maybe this Jake was gay, and like when he's dreaming about this girlfriend, he's never really dreaming about like hooking up with a girl. It doesn't seem like it's sexual desire. It seems like it's a picturesque desire.
Right. I wonder whether everything you're referring to could be explained by a lack of sexuality or an asexuality as much as a homosexuality. I mean, it seems like
just
the father
failing to fit into like straight roles.
Right.
And, yeah.
I mean, and he is sincerely interested in musicals, and he lists off those names of musicals, and it's a sort of an unending. He names like 25 musicals that
he says, I'm not really into musicals.
Fan of, right, and then he lists all of them.
Right. Because you're right, he doesn't really show desire for a man at any point.
That's the thing. Where if you think about his bedroom, one would expect in the recesses or the hidden recesses of someone's mind or his childhood bedroom to have a poster either of a man or a woman, or to have
he has a poster of Betty Davis, which
which is what are you going to do with that, right? Or you're going to have hidden pornography show up either in a memory or in the bedroom. And if you talk about sexuality, it's not redirected towards men, it's aborted at all moments, where it seems like when they're about to become sexual, he snaps out of it. He's made uncomfortable by it, in the same way that there are a series of pretty girls who show up who are intimidators in the book, high school kids, but it's not as though there's they're
not objects of lust or anything,
right?
Nor are the boys.
Right. So it feels more like a high school kid who's never matured beyond being the high school kid whom everybody mocked, who didn't have any coolness or sexuality or masculinity to him. So you see that lack of masculinity in disappointment from the father, in demeaning looks from the cool girls at the high school, and in his probably being called, gay epithets his entire life. And fearing that. But that lack of heterosexuality is clearly a driving factor in the book, less than in the movie.
I think there's one moment in the movie where she says, like, the sex has been pretty good, one would assume, or something like this. Like, I don't think we mentioned the cartoon pig. What did you? It was a very brief moment. What did you? I don't know what I think of that. Oliver Platt is so winning in the voiceover to that, but like, what did you think of the fucking cartoon pig at the end?
Is the best person. I mean, the fact that Oliver Platt, like a spectacular, obese, older actor, is willing to voice a cartoon pig, leading the main characters to his death, while the cartoon pig is being eaten away by maggots to its death. And you see the maggots drop off the cartoon pig in a slightly humorous, but just absolutely grotesque way. Oliver Platt's a national treasure, and that pig is as well. I mean, I think that it is a return to childhood, in its cartoon silliness, as it is a return towards the like actual product of death, as a retelling of a story that Jake tells earlier, which is like, hey, we used to have these pigs, but guess what happened? We were feeding them for a few days, and like they weren't moving, so we tried to like push the pig around, and it's hard to push a pig around because like it's a pig, and like it weighs a lot of pounds. When we finally pushed the pig upside down, it had been eaten to death by maggots who were still feasting on its rotten corpse.
Yeah, I think my hope, if not the actual reality, is that this has been a spoiler for the book and an unspoiler for the movie. Because I think that's fair. If you watch the movie wanting to discover a mystery, it'll drive you crazy. But I think it's like Russia. Like if you went into Russian Ark waiting to like learn the mystery of the Russian Ark, like you want to kill yourself at the end. But if you walk in knowing that it's like a weird, rambling, beautiful piece of lyrical art, then you say, all right, I'll accept it.
Right. It's sort of generous what we've done. So through the reading and spoiling of the book, and through the watching and discussing of the movie, we have now created the perfect runway for your listeners to go watch and enjoy I'm Thinking of Ending Things, a movie by Charlie Kaufman.
Yeah.
Good work. Go team.
That was my conversation with Brian Platzer. You can find him on Twitter at @bplatzer. And I'm hoping to get him back on here semi-regularly, unless all of you completely hate him, in which case let me know, and he will be banned forever. Thank you so much for listening. There's a little bit of extra tape with Brian. We actually had a pretty good conversation about reading. Real short thing. I may put that out as a tiny bonus the next day or so. But for now, thank you so much. And with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.